this piece that actually sounds, of course, significantly better with larger speaker, also louder, as you can imagine, was written in 2009 by myself. The singer in this performance, Nicholas Isherwood, was accepted to premiere this piece. Prior to that, was longtime collaborator of Caroline Stockhausen, also creating the role of Lucifer for some of the Stockhausen late opera, the cycle of 7 operas under the umbrella called Licht. In 2008, and at that point it was about 4 years after the completion of my dissertation, that eventually became a book on UC Press called Luigi Russolo, Futurist Noise, Visual Arts, and New Call. So I was about 4 years away from that particular research when I received a call from Rosalie Goldberg, art curator living in New York City and the creator of biennial performance art in New York called Performa. She was preparing for the Performa Biennial 2009 that she wanted to essentially be curated using futurist manifestos as a way of basically constructing this 3-week-long aggressive art presence in the city of New York. One of her questions was, I have read for a long time about the intoner rumori, Russolo's intoner rumori. I even reproduced some of the photographs, the few photos that are still surviving of this mechanical noisemaker built, as we know, in 1913 by Italian composer and music instrument builder Luigi Russolo. And she asked me if I could try to rebuild them. So, had she asked me in 2006, I probably would have said no, because it was way too close to my, grad school years, and I was too close when completing the dissertation. I was a little bit sick about all that topics, but 3 years later, I was sort of realigning myself with that early interest, and I was already considering turning the dissertation into a book, so I said yes. I didn't know exactly what I was going to get out of this, and also, to be honest, there was a lot of information that was missing at the time when I told her yes. In part because the instrument being created in 1913 survived in collective memory through photographs that show the exterior part of the instrument, and Russolo did not exactly leave schematics to tell us how each single one of these instruments were built. What we had from Russolo was a handful of patents in different languages, basically the same identical Italian patent translated into French and then translated into German, with some patent drawings. But as I quickly discovered, patent drawings are not there so that you can actually reproduce anything. They're only there for the person that creates something to protect him or herself from future pleasurizers. So the purpose of the patent was not to reveal any kind of information. In fact, it very much was about to disguise it, or I should say, that's the least amount of information that you could put there to protect your creation without at the same time giving any sense of how to rebuild the instrument, unless you were the one that created them in the first place. So, I have made up to that point some research, and I was able to find some information that was actually not available in English. My book was not published at the time, but in order to write the book, I had to look at a lot of documents, and some of them show other projects that Russolo eventually developed throughout the year. One was a project for a very bizarre bow that, in his mind, would have substituted in string quartet writing the normal bows that violinists and cellists use, which was kind of made with coil springs and all metal against metal. You can imagine the joy of performers and luthier with something like that. But anyway, so I had a sense of how the enharmonic bow worked. I had some sense of some of these other projects, and particularly one that I find it most fascinating, that is the one that Russell called Nuovo Strumento Musicale a Corde, which translated from the Italian would be new instrument, musical instrument, or a new string-based musical instrument. So not exactly helpful title, right? Well, it's an instrument that utilizes longitudinal vibration. So one of the few, actually, instruments that I know that utilize longitudinal vibration to produce sound. I have been studying longitudinal vibration through my, at that point, maybe 5 years long collaboration with Ellen Fullman, who resides here in Berkeley, and he's one of the few persons in the world that designed an instrument that used longitudinal mode of vibration to produce sound. So I was interested in that aspect. So I was familiar with some of the instruments that Russolo had designed after the internal rumori. On the internal rumori, the information that I had was in any case limited, and some of the information I had, I was getting that from poems. So a lot of scholars that worked on Russolo prior to my dissertation had discarded some of this poem because their point of view was like, they don't offer scientific information. We don't need them. They are sort of like an artistic spiral around the problem that does not provide us any insight on the mechanics of the instrument. False. In many of these poems, in fact, I was able to understanding also the way the writer of this poem, Marinetti, the founder of futurism, write, I was able to actually uncover some basic information about this instrument that eventually helped me in the process of reconstruction. Some information was provided in letters, and then ultimately I would say one particular instrument, which I think was the hardest to crack, that Russolo developed first. Ironically, the first instrument that Russolo developed that is called scoppiatore, and this is the instrument that Russolo first unveiled as a prototype in March 1913 in the Storchi Theater in Modena. And this instrument is called scoppiatore, which I like to translate as combustor, because it's the instrument that should make the sound of a combustion engine. Well, this instrument was hard to understand how it works because the patent that he would release only a few months later shows actually a different instrument, the one called howler or ullatore. Well, after thinking for a while and actually reading the translation, reading the original text that Russolo had produced, and particularly concerning the scoppiatore, I came to realize that perhaps one of the means of exciting the string was by virtue of using a propeller. So Russolo likely would have used an electric propeller because we know from his own manifesto of 1913 that the instrument, at least 6 out of 16 were powered electrically. So Russolo is already envisioning the possibility of powering the instrument with an electric battery so that he doesn't have to plug the instrument to the wall. This is not bad for 1913, and we actually know that in some circumstances the instruments were plugged to the wall, because you can see from the original photographs of the London concert in 1914 that there are cables that are running from the instrument to some kind of power plugs. So the battery never came about while Russolo was alive, even though he mentioned them in his writing. I figured that he would have probably do it that way. Russolo's internal rumori was, when he first debuted in August 11 of 1913, was an orchestra made up of 16 sound modules. I like to refer to them as mechanical synthesizers. They are synthesizers because there is this ambition of synthesize sound and sound frequencies, and through the help of various contraptions, mostly levers, but also cranks and other devices, to essentially handling the sound processing of this instrument. The instrument generates the sound, and the sound is processed live. And already by doing that, we're operating on sound the way that eventually we would do with synthesizer, with modular synthesizer, very, very conveniently. They are, however, not like modular synthesizer in that the sound is produced mechanically. And that is why I think the depiction of mechanical synthesizer, I find it successful to describe exactly what the 16 boxes were. You should imagine, if you've never seen the images, boxes with horns that are similar perhaps to gramophone horns that were coming out of the instrument to project the sound very directionally. So when it came the time of the reconstruction, a lot of time was spent actually investigating the materials that were used to produce the cones for gramophones. So we went to the point of maybe adopting for some of the models the material called vulcanized fiber, which sounds, so Superman, but in reality was a real material, some kind of very glorified version of cardboard, of which a great deal of cone for gramophone, as well as some speaker cabinet key material were made of. This actually made it then quite likely that Marinetti was in line when he, describing poetically the intonor mori, tell them that they were made with cardboard. And so other materials that we use, of course, were wood, which was available at the time, and then a great deal of adapted percussion instrument, because the fundamental mechanism of the intonor mori is based on a string that is mounted in the center of a drum skin. So you should picture, for example, a snare drum, and then attaching a string to the snare drum perpendicularly to the skin, we create something that is probably not different from maybe a friction drum, if you're familiar with what they are. On one hand, the string was mounted on a peg, and the instrument itself was really not so much a resonating box, but more of a device to hide and conceal what this contraption was about. So I've written extensively on the idea that these instruments are about occulting the mechanism, in part because I really feel that Russell had as primary goal in designing the cabinet for the intonor mori orchestra the idea of, again, disguising the triviality of the mechanisms. He had discussed often, in fact, about the interior part of his instrument, sometimes using terms such as intestines. So already by that we get a sense of some kind of biomechanical contraption in which, of course, we want to shield them and give them a very, very sleek and modern-looking encasement to actually hide, sometimes the triviality of a mechanism, be that, again, a real cut gut string, which we know were used in some of the intonor mori, or perhaps, again, a propeller, which was, again, something that Russell, certainly as a shape, was fascinated with. Propeller animated both poems by futurists as well as their paintings. So it would have been a very logical thing to include inside the intonor mori. 16 are this module. This was Russell's earliest orchestra. I reconstructed that in 2009 for the biennial performance art in New York City, but the preview concert was here in San Francisco. And this orchestra of 16 mechanical synthesizer, aka intonor mori, has been touring ever since. Presumably will come back in the Bay Area within a year from now. So I think I'm pretty much up with what I needed to say. So maybe I'll take questions. It seems like we have one.
Can you tell us a little bit, who was this Russell?
What
guy
yes.
was he?
So Russell started his career as a painter, even though he took some violin lesson at the younger age because the father, Domenico, was an organ tuner and builder. He was born in Portogruaro, a city not far from Venice, sharing with Venice this theory of many, many canals. It's sort of like a miniature version of Venice, actually, if you've ever been there. He was born there, but then the family moves to Milan in 1901 so that his brother can attend the conservatory. And right at that time, when Russell is moving to Milan and he could enroll in Milan's conservatory, perhaps the prominent conservatory at the time, he instead decided to begin working with engraving. So he became, as an engraver, then he upgraded, I guess, or downgrade, depending how you see it, as a painter. And then from there, in 1913, he sort of goes back to his early enthusiasm about music, writing the manifesto of noise music, and that is the manifesto that commonly referred to as the Art of Noise Manifesto. Eventually turned into a book a few years later, but right at the time when he's presenting the manifesto, which gets published on March 11, 1913, he's already building some of this instrument with the idea of innovating music as we know it, replacing the tediousness of violins and harps and pianos, and putting front and center in orchestral setting his new orchestra of mechanical synthesizers.
Thank you.